And here is our panel. So let's get started. First question goes to Tamlyn, our star. So Tamlyn, most Japanese parents want their children to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. No one says, be an actress, be a television broadcaster. So what can we do so that we can have more of our faces on television and in the movies?
Wow, thank you very much for having me along with our other panelists here, Jan, and thank you to the U.S.-Japan Consul. Thank you very much for having us here. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I think the number one idea about telling folks of Japanese American heritage is to learn how to tell your own stories. And I mean telling your, hello, Norm, I see your beautiful face there. But it's telling your own stories. It's about gathering around the table, looking at each other in the eye instead of our little devices and saying, this is who I am, this is where I come from, this is who my parents are, this is who my children are. And telling each other these stories and finding out what we have in common and perhaps what we have are differences. I don't know how everybody feels about the election, but I'm sure there's a myriad of opinions. And we all have to learn how to discuss that respectfully, with trust and with dignity, because we all have investment in how our country is run. So the beginning of this is to remove ourselves from the electronic devices. Sorry, Silicon Valley, but it's about old-fashioned storytelling. It's about touching one another and saying, hey, you feel warm today. I came from 90 degrees Los Angeles. How is it 65 degrees up here in Northern California? It's about these little things, about these little connections that remind us of what it means to be a human being, means to be American, be a Japanese American, be sansei, nisei, yonsei, gosei, yorosei. It's about being connected with each other, and that's what I need to say we need to be reminded of day to day.
But let's be honest, thank you for that insightful answer. But, Tamlyn, let's be honest. We see you walking the red carpet. We see you, we've got all kinds of things. And Scott has a great story, too. But let's be honest. Hollywood looks like such a glamorous life. People magazine named you, of course, one of the 50 most beautiful people in the world. What's been the toughest challenge for you personally?
Balance. It's about balance. I'm sure that a lot of the millennials, as well as people who are involved in the entertainment industry or interested in the entertainment industry, are very, very interested in what's going on with whitewashing. Hashtag Oscars so white. So Ghost in the Shell, Aloha, a myriad of TV and movies and films that we see that are cast usually with the Caucasian person in mind, in place of an Asian character. And we have to learn how to protest peacefully, but vocally and loudly as to the reasons why we need to see our faces, because the normalization, the heteronormative visual image of a Caucasian person perpetually in place of an Asian person diminishes our self-worth. And it's great to see, you on the TV screen day after day and say, oh, Jan's going to do the news today. It's a wonderful feeling to be able to reinforce that we belong here, that we are one of the citizens of this great country. So doctors and lawyers, I've played many of them, so thank you very, very, very much. But our job is to tell stories, and that's what I'm perpetually trying to get all of us to do, no matter what your vocation is.
Great, thanks, Tamlyn. Scott has a really cute story about watching you on Karate Kid too, but so I'm going to go to Scott next.
When he was little.
Yes, when he was little. So I want him to tell that story, but then the question to Scott, when you tell this, I introduced Scott earlier to some people today at the lunch, and I said, this is Scott Fujita, and they went, oh, Fujita-san, and they're looking at him in great surprise. So, Scott, what are people's reactions when you show up and you say, hi, Scott Fujita? But tell the story first about...
Yes, so I've been seeing that kind of surprise on people's faces for all of my life. Growing up as a kid, you saw in the treatment earlier, 4 years old, being on a camping trip with my folks and my grandparents and walking up to the kid next door and, hi, I'm Scott Fujita and I'm Japanese, and everybody looks at me like I'm crazy and double takes. And here I am now as a grown 6'5", Caucasian man with my 5'5" Japanese American father. So we've been getting double takes for many, many, many years. But what's funny, and you talked about that look of surprise, was we played in the Super Bowl when I was with the Saints back in 2009, and the game was in Miami. And Japan had sent out a number of reporters to come out and cover this Japanese Super Bowl champion, and there's Fujita. And they were so excited. And Tuesday, and the week before the Super Bowl, was like the big media day. So we're in this humongous conference room, and there are thousands of media folks there. And I get up to my pedestal, and I guarantee there were no American reporters there. They were all reporters in town from Japan to cover Scott Fujita. And the look of disappointment on their face when they saw me. and I said, I know, I understand. But they said, all right, we're here, we've come all this way, so we might as well hear this guy out. So they did. So yeah, it's a long-winded answer to your question, but I've been getting that look my whole life. And side note, she said the cute story. So Tamlyn here, I grew up in Southern California in the 80s. So I grew up on her movies in Oxnard with a father who is a spitting image of Pat Morita. So with the Karate Kid movies and being a white kid in Southern California looking up to Daniel LaRusso, the karate champion, I mean, that was good stuff. But we lived about 20 or 30 minutes from where Pat Morita lived. Right. So we shared the same mall essentially. So I remember being a kid walking through the mall with my father and people coming up to my dad and saying, hey, Mr. Miyagi, may I have your autograph, please? So, so I'm a little starstruck right now.
So Scott, you said in the video that in your heart, you're Japanese American. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, it's interesting because growing up, I don't think that I overthought it. It's just that's how I felt. And I think my grandmother, from the very beginning, just sort of taught us that you define for yourself who and what you are. So it wasn't about skin color, it wasn't about race, I wasn't really into labels or things like that. And my dad always said, Japanese American, he's my son, I love him just the same. So it was that sort of idea that I grew up with. But what I think more than anything else, there were certain things about Japanese culture that just drew me in, this sort of sense of respect and dignity and grace, and my grandmother especially. I didn't tell you this when we met earlier because I didn't want to embarrass you, but I will embarrass you now. You remind me so much of my grandmother when she was your age. I mean, my grandmother was this regal, graceful, beautiful, articulate woman who we lost a few years ago. But you remind me of her.
Thank you.
And I remember at my wedding, the second dance I had was with my grandmother, and I got down on my knees, and I was still taller than her on my knees. So, so maybe we can get a dance at the reception afterward.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. I'm going to move on to Kathy Matsui. Kathy, as we saw in the video, you termed the coin Womenomics some 17 years ago, and of course, Prime Minister Abe has adopted Womenomics. Of course, he recognized that you coined the term. What advancements have you seen in 17 years that have been made in Womenomics in Japan? Kathy?
So I'll just say a couple of things. One is, I can tell you 17 years ago when I wrote my first report, and I deal in finance in Japan. 99.9% of my clients are Japanese men, sorry. The reaction was basically zero. I didn't get any reaction. They sort of said, tossed it in the round circular filing cabinet. And now, if you go to Japan, if any of you pick up a Japanese newspaper or a magazine, at least this is now part of the Japanese vernacular. It's actually coming up in daily conversations. Not that everybody is convinced that it's the right thing, but at least it's a subject of discussion that it was never really 17 years ago. Second, many of you may know this already, but did you know that when I started writing about this 17 years ago, the percentage of Japanese women actually working outside the home was only about 55, 56%? Do you know what it is today? 66%. Do you know what the United States female participation rate is? 64. Those two lines crossed last year. Now, granted, a lot of those Japanese women are taking on part-time roles as opposed to full-time jobs, so they're not all working full-time positions, but at least the numbers are at record levels, and they're actually higher than here in the United States, which is kind of shocking. So, no, we haven't groomed enough female leaders. There's still a long, long road ahead, but at least the numbers are moving in the right direction. At least it's becoming in the Japanese consciousness in a way that wasn't before.
So we saw in the video that you became the partner in Goldman Sachs Japan, the first Japanese-American woman to do that. Is it easier to be a Japanese-American woman in business here in America or in Japan? What do you think, Kathy?
Well, I've never really worked here. Almost my entire adult life was in Japan, and so
I can't say, it's hard for me to compare, for example, if I'd worked at Mitsubishi Bank versus Goldman Sachs. I've only worked for foreign financial institutions, so I can't really compare my experience with anybody else, but I will say that, of course, my environment is very male-dominated. As I said, my clients are male, most of my colleagues are male, but I think being the only female strategist, what I do is a macro researcher in Japan, that actually has helped me stand out. They remember me, I'm not Sato-san, Suzuki-san, the man, who they always see, but they remember me. So actually I found that it's to my slight advantage to have been a female, in fact, in Japan, which is...
And Japanese American in Japan.
Yes, and so my name card says Kashi Matsui. So as soon as they say Kashi, the phonetic, in katakana, they say, gaijin da. She is alien. So that means I've got license when I walk into a meeting with a Japanese client for the first time. I can actually, let's say things in a slightly different or maybe more aggressive and direct way than if I were Japanese. So it helps that my first name is Kashi. By the way, my parents named me Kathy, a name they still to this day cannot pronounce. I don't know why that is, but there you go.
Thanks, Kathy. Let's go to our millennial, Kenshiro. As we saw, there's a ramen boom hitting America. Thanks to you and your family, Kenshiro. Are you surprised that America sort of embraced the ramen boom so much?
I think just this food culture and industry itself, there's a huge, I think, appreciation of Japanese food. And within that, sushi, I think, led the way. And then now there's ramen. And one of the things about ramen is that it's like a blank canvas. You can make it very customizable to the palates of the people in your area. And so compared to maybe other washoku or maybe tempura or things that maybe you can't be so creative with, ramen actually allows you to be creative. And so kind of putting those two together, and it's a comfort food that people can eat every day. But you have really amazing ramen shops opening from Japan to the US. But what we see today is you have American chefs starting to embrace the ramen culture and opening ramen shops throughout the country.
And so there are some 80,000 ramen shops in Japan. So, Kenshiro, are you looking to have like 160,000 across America and the world? What are your plans?
It's amazing to see that every month there's about 10 to 12 ramen shops opening throughout the country. So I think the opportunity for the market is really exciting for us. But what we do know is that we have to respect and appreciate kind of the fundamental techniques of what makes a great bowl of ramen. And so as our company, as we grow and the opportunities that we get to enter new markets, our job is to make sure that we relay that message to the customer so that when they do open ramen shops, they understand the basic building blocks of a great bowl of ramen, but you can localize it and use local ingredients and kind of switch it up so that you can make it much more approachable to that area.
So, for instance, I know in Florida they're doing some Cuban-style ramen, and Texas is Texas-style ramen, yes?
Exactly. And in Texas, in Austin, Texas, there's a ramen shop that does a Texas barbecue brisket skimmin. And it sounds crazy, but if you ever get to go, it works really well and it's super good. Okay. And so we're trying to encourage more of that kind of movement throughout the country.
So it's a ramen movement. Back to you, Tamlyn. We've seen you in a number of roles, as we saw in the video. But at what point did you understand that you had the power as an actress, as an actor, to educate all of us on the issues of being Japanese American?
Oh, wow. The very first walk on set for Karate Kid 2. For those of you who do not know, I do not come from a acting background. I did not study acting. I went to UCLA to become a history teacher specifically for middle school. That's what my life goal was. And I got sidetracked into portraying an Okinawan character. I am from Okinawa, Haisai. and to be on set with Pat Morita and Noble McCarthy and all my older brothers, so that includes Ralph Macchio and Ryuji Okamoto, Mark Hayashi, and Joey Miyashima. All those actors of Japanese American descent taught me as to the importance of retaining your culture, of retaining your heritage. No matter what degree, as long as you have your name, and it's attesting to Scott's last name, he holds it, he owns it, and all of us do share that commonality, I believe, the most of us here. And you belong to that culture. You don't own it, you belong to it, and that's something that for me it was shared. And I try to imbue that feeling with those of us who have Japanese American connections and those of us who do not have the connection, to share the beauty of Japanese American and Japanese culture, of what I know. Excuse me for flying in so late notice today, but I attended also Toshiro Mifune's received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame this morning at 11:30. And I remember our connection with Jan's and my connection is that I got to work on Picture Bride, which is about the picture brides in Hawaii, and Jan had hosted a retrospective just last year, and that's how we reconnected. Toshiro Mifune, a global movie star, also taught me what it meant to be a part of this global community, in what it means to be a movie maker, is that there's humility, there's humbleness, there's the ability to be as real and as truthful as possible for this celluloid camera, to tell the stories as truthfully as possible. That's why he has so much energy. And to be able to participate in a panel like this or in a one-to-one conversation, that's my job, is to give you my energy, to give you my story, to give you my perspective, and to also be a great listener. I'm always interested in listening to what Jan says, to what Norm says, to what Irene Hirano says, to what the former Senator Daniel Inouye has said, because they are accomplished listeners. And they are the recipients of our stories, and they share it amongst other people outside this room. So I have learned that lesson is to gather those stories as a vessel and to shoot it back out with as much joyfulness and truthfulness as possible. So being Japanese American is to receive, but also to give as gracefully and as honestly and as lovingly as possible. And I think that I can attest that's to being Japanese.
Right. Thanks, Tamlyn. Up to Scott.
She, by the way.
Yeah. And you watch, right? You watch a Karate Kid too and all that. You've said that you identify Japanese American in your heart. And Tamlyn talked about, as an actress, her job is to help educate. What do you think? What's your job to educate people about the history of being Japanese American? Scott?
Well, I think kind of like what I touched on earlier, and almost half jokingly, just this idea of having to retell my story over and over and over again, because there's just sort of something unusual about this big white guy with a Japanese name. And again, I say that half jokingly, but there's value in sharing the story. And like you said, it's looking people in the eye and having conversations. So I've had the good fortune to play in states like Missouri, Louisiana, Texas, and Ohio, in states where they were never taught or learned about Japanese internment. So the value in sharing my story in a locker room where a reporter comes up and says, "Hey, what's your last name? Is that Italian?" "No, actually it's Japanese." "Oh, how'd that happen?" "Well, I was adopted." "Oh, tell me more about that." "Well, my father's name is Rod and he's a school teacher." "Oh, where he's from? Is he from Japan?" "No, actually he was born in a Japanese internment camp in Gila River, Arizona." "Wait, what did you just say? What does that mean? Like a prison? Wait, what's that all about?" So to me, that is the value in sharing the story. It's the power of story. And that's the message in articulating it in some of those communities where the kids just grew up in schools where they never learned about it. So to me, that's the message. And again, I keep referring back to my grandmother and just my conversations with her over the years, and especially as I aged, and kind of take her message from her experience and share that in the places that I lived and worked. Shortly after the attacks at September 11th, and you touched on it earlier, I remember having a conversation with her sort of about how her feelings about it. And she said she was so concerned that this sort of mass paranoia and prejudice and xenophobia might start again. She said it might not be to the level where people are forcibly interned, but I'm concerned about the rhetoric. And here we are, in recent weeks and months, and some of that rhetoric is back, and it's heightened, and those things are alarming. And that's, again, where the power of story is so valuable. To look someone in the eye and have a conversation, hear them out, and to share your own story and hopefully break down some of those barriers and reduce some of that prejudice and that explosive language and dialogue. you talked about social media as well, and us on our devices. And again, apologies to Facebook and Twitter and everybody else, but Wednesday morning I actually deleted my Facebook and Twitter accounts, my apps from my phone, because I didn't want to hear all that. And I said, I'd rather look someone in the eye and hear their story, not hear the explosive, marginalized characterization of a story. So it's just, it's an interesting time, and I think the message that my grandmother gave to me is to go into conversations as accepting as possible, but be willing to teach, and teach with an open mind and an open heart, and just share your story as openly and honestly as you can. So yeah, I obviously credit my grandmother with a lot, because she was an exceptional woman.
Thanks, Scott. To Kathy, you know, she and I were texting just a couple days ago, and I said, Kathy, I need one more picture, please, for your video. Could you send? And she says, Jan, I'll get it. I'll swamp, but I have to explain the new President-elect Trump to my Japanese bosses. I said, oh, please do that first. Never mind the picture I need for your video. But it's a trying time, and I'm just going to ask, as a Japanese-American woman in Japan, you know, what do you tell women in Japan and here who want to be you? What advice do you give, Kathy?
So, you know, one common, you know, question that I often get is, you know, how do you, I guess, you know, succeed in a career? I have 2 children. You know, how do you do that whole balance act? And the first piece of advice I give them is, and I actually did this myself, is I used to think about balance, and you're a perfect mom, you're a perfect career woman, you're a perfect wife, and balance implies 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, doesn't it? Does anybody in this room have that kind of balance? Raise your hand. Well, I did
No
not.
one.
Oh, I see somebody. Okay. Well, you're a minority.
One hand, one hand. Whoa, way to go.
Woohoo, woohoo. Yeah. So I came back from my first maternity leave thinking I could do it, right? I could do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and I drove myself crazy with stress because I clearly could not manage that balance. What I did was, and here's a tip for everybody, men included, is strike that word balance out of your vocabulary, and I instead substituted the word equilibrium. Because I think everybody in their life cycles, men, women, whoever you are, you have different stages of your life that sometimes you can operate at 100%, other times 60%. Sometimes you have a baby that's appeared. Sometimes you have aging parents. In my case, I became ill 15 years ago. So you have to operate at different levels that feels right for you. And I also have this great saying, I think I stole it from somebody else, which is, done is enough. Done is better than perfect, right? And I think, especially we women, we always strive for perfection, and perfection is frankly an impossible goal. So done is okay. Your house can be a mess, but if it's done, your kids are alive, you know, they're fed. That's great.
All right, Kathy. I'll remember that. Done is good. All right, to Kenshiro. You're just 30 years young. Oh, I'm going to spill the beans. And newly engaged. Woo! His fiance is in the audience. All right, 30 years young, newly, as a millennial, explain what the U.S.-Japan relationship, why the U.S.-Japan relationship should be important to people your age in both Japan and here in the U.S.
So to be honest, you know, growing up in Hawaii, where you have a lot of Japanese Americans, I don't think I faced the same challenges as other JAs faced in other parts of the country. But joining the U.S.-Japan Council in 2014 really, I think, kind of intensified the importance of understanding what's going on and what we can do as JAs. And I think it's 2 parts for me. One is attending these conferences and being able to hear and learn about the struggles that our senior JA leaders have gone through. Norman Mineta, the late Senator Inoue, and these JA leaders have really challenged themselves and have gone through life's challenges that gave us JA or young JAs an opportunity and a foundation to go on and really build our path. And so I think hearing these stories and understanding that we didn't have to go through that, unfortunately, we don't have to go through that. There's a deep appreciation that we're recipients of these opportunities. That struck me strongly 3 years ago. But the second part, and I think the bigger part for me, is being selected as an Emerging Leaders Program in 2014. And if you get to meet any of these EOPs, every year 12 young and bright JAs from their own fields come together with a common goal to strengthen the U.S. and Japan relations. And I've never been a part of a group where you can come together with the common goal to work together and achieve something as a group. And for the EOPs out there, it's been an amazing ride. And we, I think, are responsible now that we have the opportunities to come together like this and further strengthen whatever we can do as millennials for both U.S. and Japan.
Okay. So a couple lightning round questions quickly to the panel. Then I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. So the theme this year, as you know, is Imagine, Innovate, Inspire. So, Tamlyn, if you could innovate anything magical, fun, what would be your innovation?
Oh, wow. Well, pertinent to my industry, I think I would like to see seminal movies cast with not only Asian Americans, but Latinos, African Americans. So I would like to see True Grit with a Japanese American face in the John Wayne role.
Cool, love that. All right.
I would love to see the Seven Samurai with all Latinos. I know we've seen it, the Magnificent Seven with Denzel Washington, but it's just like innovation. It's like, because it's important to see our faces on the screen. And even though we have the original, just to put it, just like a video game, right? Hey, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, to put videos, to put the movies and put faces that we want to see playing the hero or the villain. I think that would be, really
great
awesome.
innovation.
So
Thank
there
you
you
very
go.
much. Thank you, Tamlyn. Scott, to you, what innovation could you imagine?
First of all, I love that answer, and I think Hamilton may have set a trend in motion with that. I have not seen it yet, but my wife saw it a few months ago and is just obsessed. So that trend, I think, could be gaining steam here. Yeah. So what innovation? I think I probably would have said a ramen burger, but it sounds like Ken's already taken that one. So that's out.
Taken, done.
No, I wish I had some cool, hip, cutting-edge, technology idea to share with everybody, but I don't. But given kind of where we're at, and this is not a novel idea by any means, but it would certainly be a game changer, I think, is if Election Day was a national holiday.
Yes.
I think that might be a pretty good innovation. No more excuses. Everybody, get out and you have a chance to vote. So that's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Kathy, to you, what innovation would you like to see?
Well, the first thing that pops in my mind is, because I fly about 1/3 of the year, is beam me up, Scotty. No jet lag flying. Can somebody invent that? My more serious one is, my parents, as Jan mentioned in the video, did not go to college. They sent 4 of us kids to college. I support a women's university called Asian University for Women. The founder is actually here in the room, Kamal Ahmad. If you have a chance to meet him, please meet him. But I really think education and the transformative power of education, we all think in the United States and in Japan that it's like oxygen. We take it for granted. Of course you go to school. But this university, it's filled with 600 women from 15 different countries across Asia. Mrs. Abe, the first lady, is a patron. And I see with my own eyes, it's based in Bangladesh, but these women come from Afghanistan, from Sri Lanka, from Cambodia. They're the first generation kids to go to college in their families, and you see how hungry they are and what they want to do with that education by giving back to their communities. And I just feel in the United States and in Japan, education becomes this rat race, right? How many people actually have equal access to good quality education? It's become out of reach for many families. How do we innovate education so it is accessible to so much more people than we currently are reaching?
Okay, education, innovation. Okay, Kenshiro, to you, we know the ramen burger's already been done, so what innovation would you like to see?
I think just continue to encourage the innovation of really craft ramen here in the U.S. It'd be really cool someday if we have more prominent Texas-style ramen or Florida-style ramen, Atlanta, and then at some point we would have Japanese people come to travel to the U.S. to go and try those ramen and really respect it. And so that would be really cool to continue that innovation.
Okay, there you go. All right, also the theme is inspire. So Tamlyn, to you, who inspires you?
It sounds really cheesy, but I try to draw as much inspiration from every person I meet and every chance and opportunity that wants to connect with me or wants to share something with me. I get that treasure of that person's story, that person's energy, and that person's trust in investing in me, and I really do. It sounds cheesy, but I really do partake that kind of giving.
Okay, thank you. Scott, who inspires you?
I think I draw inspiration from a lot of people throughout my life and throughout history, but right now, honestly, I'm really inspired by your generation, the millennials. And I know there are all these sort of stereotypes and stigmas about the millennial who lives in his parents' basement until he's 35, or who can't pick their heads up from their devices. But I mean, like your generation are such disruptors. And we are going to be dependent on that type of disruption moving forward. And I have a cousin, for instance, who just graduated from UCLA, and instead of getting on the hamster wheel like the rest of us do right out of college, and go get a job in a 9-to-5 and everything's sort of in lockstep, he decided he was going to go move to Prague for a year with his girlfriend and just figure it out. And now he's teaching English and he's loving it. And I don't think he thinks that's going to be a career of his, but it's a new experience that he's going to come back with and bring home. And I'm so inspired by that because no one I grew up with even thought that way. And maybe when he gets back, he's going to be living in his parents' basement for a while. But he's going to have a perspective that so many of us fail to have. So that I don't know, I'm inspired by that.
Okay, Kathy, who inspires you?
My parents, first and foremost. My dad, he has a big orchid nursery in Salinas. I was actually born in El Camino Hospital, just down the road from here. He has 20% of the U.S. orchid market. So Trader Joe's, Safeways, please buy his orchids. But he came with a 10,000 yen note in his pocket, no English. And my mother, more importantly, followed him blindly to this country and had 4 children, raised all 4 of us with no help. I complain, and I have somebody helping me in home in Tokyo. And there was always dinner on the table. I don't know how she did it. And she is a tea ceremony urasenke teacher. She teaches in Monterey, about 30 people, ages 8 to 80. And she is Christian also. My parents are Christian, which is very unusual. They come from Naraken. Nobody's Christian in Naraken. But they're Christian, and those Christian values, they really imbibed in all 4 of us kids. So really respect my parents. And they make omochi and osechi ryori from scratch every year.
All right. So thanks, Kathy. And Kenshiro, who inspires you?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of JA leaders in this room who inspire me to become better. But I think for sure, my mother. I've never. She wakes up, does laundry, makes breakfast, took us to school, went to work to help my dad, picked us up. Before doing anything, she made dinner and then took care of herself. And so, not just maybe seeing how hard she worked, but she did it every day. And I was just home 2 days ago for business, and she still does it. She was the first one to wake up, last one to sleep. But the more impressive thing that I've been able to draw inspiration from is that she's never complained about it. She never monkued about it. And I think that was something that I try to hold true in my values.
All right, your mom. So can I get some house lights up a little bit? This is a time when you get to ask questions of our panelists. If you can stand and just shout it out, otherwise we'll run a mic to you. And because we've been talking about millennials, I expect millennials to ask questions. I already told my daughter, Jenna, I said, tell all your millennial friends to ask questions. I hope she passed. Right here. Oh, Chris. Can we get a mic to Chris? Chris, you're a loud voice from Hawaii. Chris Kubota from Hawaii, but give her a mic, please. Thank you very much. Chris, go.
I'm not a millennial, but I have a question for Kathy. I think doing Womenomics for 17 years, I think a lot of it has to do with your environment. And for me, my success as a business person was because of my environment and the affiliates, partners, friends that I had. My male affiliates, my male partners, they were very supportive. They were very sophisticated. They understood they were ahead of their times. So you have a room full of very sophisticated, very smart gentlemen here. I would like you to share your thoughts and your advice to them so that you can help them to help us and the women from here and from the world to excel.
Okay, Kathy, you're up.
So one thing I think
Tamlyn,
is that for me, similar, I had some fantastic male mentors and sponsors who lifted me up. And there was a diversity panel on Womenomics before this plenary session, and there was a comment in the panel that oftentimes in Japan, and I think you hear it here as well, that you give a woman an opportunity to get promoted, and they turn you down. They're not actually they don't want that managerial post or something like that. And I have had that happen to me many times. And I manage a team not just in Japan, but in China, and India, and Australia, and Korea. It's not just Japanese or it's not just American. This is pretty universal. So when that happens to you, male managers in this room, don't give up on the first no. Say to them, but the organization or I really believe in you. We have given a vote of confidence in you. And I think females, and I'm going to be very generalistic here, we tend to underestimate our capabilities. If there are 10 criteria that are needed to fill that promotion post, usually women say they may have all 10, but they'll say, I only have 5 of the 10. I could not possibly do that role. I'm sorry, but my male colleagues would say they actually only have 3 of the 10. I'm there, right? So I'm making a very broad generalization, I admit, but I think just giving the woman that vote of confidence and that little extra boost, you may be very surprised at what you find.
Okay, Kathy. Tamlyn, anything to add? You want to add to Chris's comment about what we get?
No.
You're good, okay.
Let's hear from
Okay, question back here, I can see it. Gentlemen, can we get the mic to him? All right, shout out your name, where you're from.
My name is Steve Takanashi. I'm an ELP from last year, 2015. Grew up in LA, but I live in Tokyo now. So I'll be a little bit vulnerable, but I really want to know from Scott and perhaps from Tamlyn as well, but especially for Scott. So I'm not quite your height. I'm 6'3". My parents are short, but even with that, growing up, I used to really be insecure and many times wish that I was white. Many times just feel like there was a ceiling on my physical abilities in sports because I wasn't black. I played basketball. And so those kind of things that I had as a Japanese American kid that impacted my identity and the choices I made, what could we do, I'm a dad now, what could we do to the next generation down, Japanese American, even Japanese nationals, to instill a more positive, unique identity?
Thank you. Scott.
I think, again, I keep talking about the power of story. I think it's just sharing stories, sharing stories of so many leaders in this room, sharing stories of the 442nd, for instance, and my grandfather, who I was always so proud of growing up and just hearing his stories and what he did while his family was interned. That made me so proud. Now, granted, I had sort of the privileged upbringing of living in a community where overwhelming number of my classmates and friends were Hispanic or Black or Polynesian, and I was, the minority by a landslide of being, again, a Caucasian with a Japanese last name. But I think there's just so many valuable lessons to share just about Japanese American history. And just a simple trip to the Japanese American National Museum. I think walking, your children through that museum, if you haven't been there yet, and showing the experience and what so many have been through will help articulate it and paint the picture for them and hopefully give them a lot of pride in where their family came from. Because like I said, just my grandparents' experience and the way they moved their way through it with such grace, my grandmother to take her experience in internment and use that as an opportunity to hone her teaching skills and kind of work on her trade, and she ended up having a 30 or 40-year teaching career. For my grandfather to come out of the war in the 442nd, go back to Berkeley, Bolt School of Law, and go back to Ventura County and become, the county's first bilingual attorney. Those are the stories that I love sharing with my kids. My kids are going to be as far removed from I guess Japanese-ness as you can be. 3 little white girls, and I kind of with their kids, it's going to be even further removed. But I'm going to make damn sure the story gets passed down.
Okay, Scott, thanks. Tamlyn, to you.
Oh, I just have to echo. It's because it's not only his story, it's our story. You got to remember that going to the museum, not only the Japanese American Museum, but the African American Museum, the Chinese American Museum, the Jewish Museum, in Los Angeles, up here in the Bay Area, across the nation, that these are our stories. And being Japanese, it's very, very specific, and that you have that power to claim them as your own. You belong to those stories. Those are your stories. You're going to extract as much pride as you can, and it's going to keep on growing. He's going to pass it to his kids. I'm going to pass it to my niece and nephew. This is what we need to do in terms of conferencing, in terms of having the conversations. And the conversations may seem so minuscule, may seem so small, so small talk, but it's connecting. And if you just have that second of just looking directly at you and going, man, you have the power. You have the power. Just own it, because it's in you. It's in me. I give it back to you. I'm going to echo chamber it back to you. You have an echo chamber here. It's not just on social media. It's in these conversations, and to just reinforce that you belong. You're one of us. He's one of us. She's one of us. It's that continuation of just making sure that you know who you are, and just reaffirming that back to each other, back and forth, for perpetuity.
Yep. And thank you for being so brave to ask your question, by the way. Very brave. Thank you. I'm going to take one more question from the audience. So this side, we haven't heard from this side. What's going on here? Okay, right here, table 5. Stand up. Can we get a mic? Run. Yeah, I'm bossy all the time. My kids remind me, but go ahead.
Hi.
Your name, where you're from?
Erica Ninoyu. I'm from Alaska, ELP 2016. I can tell, Kathy, you're very passionate about education, and I think I agree that it is something that's glazed over, and I think we can do a lot more to reform education. And I'm afraid I can say this as a middle school teacher, that our schools are not keeping up and not preparing for the millennial generation. So I'm wondering, through personal experience, what are some things that you think we can change our system, or the change that you would like to see so we can invest in a better future?
Okay, Kathy, you want to take that?
So this is just off the top of my head, but one thing that I've always thought of, my husband's German, and I think in some countries around the world, they have sort of 1-year requirement for almost like military service. I'm not saying military necessarily here, but I think every young teenage person should have some kind of experience doing community service, right? It doesn't have to be for a year. It can be for a few months. I think no matter what class, what part of society you come from, giving back, seeing how other people live in your society, building empathy, I think that's so important. Of course, a lot of kids do that, but I think really devoting and dedicating oneself to somebody else in your community, that really builds bridges that I think it may be difficult to form in your own little community or in your school. That would be my suggestion.
So I hope that helps. So last question to my panelists. Advice in Japanese or English that you were told by your parents or grandparents. What did they tell you? And actually, those words help you to succeed. Tamlyn, I'm going to go to you first.
It's very Japanese. It's gambatte. It's itsumo gambatte, gambatte, gambatte. Do your best, because it's not only for you, it's for us. And it wasn't only just for our family, it was for us. And I think they really did mean it for whatever community, whatever family, whatever organization I would find myself in. It's always gambatte for us.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Tamlyn. Scott, to you. What advice did you hear from your parents, grandparents that helped you move forward?
No, that's great, and I got the same bit of advice growing up. I mean, do your best and be yourself. Those are 2 big sort of pillars of my upbringing. But then 2 other areas, sort of, I guess, themes that resonated throughout my childhood was this notion of shikataganai, especially given my grandparents' experience in internment, and go for broke, which were 2 very difficult and conflicting, I think, viewpoints for me growing up. So it's like hearing about my grandma's experience and the way she dealt with it, and it was just this idea of, wait, you guys were interned and no one did anything about that, and I was always just so enraged about that. And I think I carried that chip on my shoulder for so long, And I think I preferred hearing about my grandfather's story with the 442nd and the go for broke theme, and I want to lay it all on the line and take the fight to the opponent. And that's kind of how I was raised, advocating for social justice, and all that's great. But then as I've aged and tempered a little bit, I think I've worked on kind of marrying the two ideologies together and striking the right balance or equilibrium between the two. Maybe it's a little bit of both. You know, it's the idea of recognizing when some things might be beyond your control, but having a strategic plan to move forward. I mentioned my grandmother earlier, you know, recognizing that not a whole lot we can do with this, but I'm gonna work on my skill as a teacher while I'm in camp. Fantastic example. Right now, a lot of people are angry with the election results from a few days ago. You can go out and blow buildings up, or you can get to work. You can get out the vote. You can get people empowered within their communities. Be strategic about it. So it's finding equilibrium between those two ideologies.
Okay. Kathy, to you, what advice? Parents or grandparents?
Yeah, of course, I had two very Japanese parents who just said, you know, don't do drugs, don't drink, and get straight A's, right? But beyond that, I think it was be grateful for what you have. And those words sort of like went in one ear and went out the other, frankly, for most of my life until I was diagnosed with cancer in age 36. I thought, my God, you know, I had made partner at Goldman. I'd become, you know, ranked in these, you know, polls, and I had my second child. I was on the top of literally the world. And then I got bombed with this diagnosis, and I thought, this isn't fair. I actually literally said to my husband, I don't have time to have cancer, right? This is like a real major inconvenience in my life. And that really, you know, I think was a true wake-up call. And I remember my mother, I was, you know, of course, just sitting in a puddle of tears, feeling sorry for myself. And she said, look, you know, God has a plan for you. You know, you will survive. Don't just brew, you know, in your sadness. You will survive and you will help others. You've been given a gift of survival, so pass that gift forward. So I'm very open about my illness. I help people in Japan. I don't know anything about medicine, but I'm a survivor. So I try to help, you know, pass that gift of hope on to other people. So be thankful for every single day is what my parents always told me.
Good advice. Okay, final to you, Kenshiro. What advice did you hear from your parents, grandparents that have helped you?
Yeah, so my dad's from Tochigi and my mother's from Okinawa. But I think the one thing that struck me is, or the word is gaman, perseverance. Life is hard, life has its challenges, but as long as your vision or your mission is clear and your purpose is and your why is clear to you, that you will, if you persevere, you will get there. You will have your challenges, but you will get there. And so I think for me, that gaman has been very personal.
Great words. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a hand for Tamlyn, Tomita, Scott Fujita, Kathy Matsui, Kenshiro Uki.